we've been in this void for hours. Are you sure that was the same portal that sent you here? Yeah, that's exactly what the portal I stepped through looked like. If I was to hazard a guess, we might have taken too long and so the other side closed before we could reach it. Well, in that case, we better buckle down for the long haul. Got any videos or anything to watch? I do. In fact, I was working on one before I got pulled into your universe. It's not finished, but I'd say it's good to watch now. Alright, sounds good.
You'll never get to the boss! You gotta get to both of us! Don't just stand there! I'm vengeance.
Happy Halloween, everyone! This is the Ultimate speaking, and today we are going to be talking about The Batman. Now, since its release in 2022, The Batman has faced several comparisons to Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy, with people considering it to be better or worse. And now, while I don't fall into this camp, I definitely feel that previous Batman films, and the character's history as a whole, definitely had a hand in crafting the film that we have today. So let's take a look to see how the movie itself holds up. Unfortunately, I couldn't afford any sort of Batman-themed decorations, so for the time being, I'm just gonna turn off the lights and hope that the ambiance carries the scene. Now, let's get into this film. Now, before we can talk about the film itself, let's get into the history behind this film. So, in 2013, DC had established their own cinematic universe in order to compete with Marvel and the MCU, which had really been hitting its stride recently. 3 years after the release of their first film, DC introduced their version of Batman in a versus movie, Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. This version of Batman would appear 2 more times throughout the cinematic universe's lifespan, though strangely enough, Batman never got a film of his own. Rather, he would make guest appearances or supporting roles in the others. As it turns out, there actually were plans for a solo Batman film to be released. In fact, DC had announced around 2016 or so that Ben Affleck, who had been cast as Batman at that point, was going to write, direct, and be the star of this film.
Yeah, dude! I'm going for the dub, bitches!
Unfortunately though, this would not last, as less than a year after the project's announcement, Ben Affleck would step down as both the writer and director of the film, followed by a whole other host of problems that would plague its development over the years, resulting in the film's cancellation.
So was that your plan, or just one of those stupid ideas you always seem to have?
Or so we thought. You see, cancelled was a pretty strong term for me to use back there. Rather, I'd say the better term is restructured. The project was given a completely new cast of characters, a new director in the form of Matt Reeves, and an entirely new story as well, set completely outside the DCEU. Changes which, in my opinion, were definitely for the better. To show you what I mean, let's take a look at some of the characters and compare them to previous iterations. Now, as I mentioned, the characters in this version of the Batman invite a lot of comparisons to their previous iterations, so let's go through a few of them and see what differences they have. Now, before we begin, I'd just like to apologize for the quality of some of the images. The Batman's cinematography makes it a bit difficult to use still images. Let's start with the Riddler. I really like his portrayal in this film. I like how they made him a bit more deranged and less of the more theatrical type character he is in the comics. One of the reasons I like this is because not only does it fit in with, a more grounded world, but it also fits with how Gotham is presented in this movie. Gotham City is not known in any iteration of Batman for treating the mentally ill very well, so it makes sense that Riddler would have been messed up by his experiences. But at the same time, I like how they still make him the villain of the story. Yeah, Gotham City is a terrible place, full of terrible people, but the Riddler is doing nothing positive to contribute to the city. On top of that, one detail about this Riddler and almost every other interpretation of the Riddler that we've seen is that he always likes to prove how smart he is. Like, yeah, this version of Riddler is a bit more sympathetic than the others, but at the same time, not really trying to actually prove that Gotham City can be saved. He's trying to show that he was smart enough to figure it out. Like, when you compare what he's doing to what Batman is doing, he should not be having this much fun. Not to mention the childish tantrum he throws the minute he hears about any potential holes in his plan. Like, when he hears that he might not be immortalized for his acts, he immediately flies off the handle. And while that's definitely not all I have to say about Riddler, I feel it fits more into the story section than it does with character. And while we're on the topic of villains, I like what they did with the Penguin here as well. I like that he isn't in cahoots with the Riddler, and rather has his own problems going on, separate from him. In this continuity, he's more of a joke and is an underling of Carmine Falcone, who seems to be the higher up in terms of mob bosses in Gotham, both of whom have a lot of charisma and really carry a lot of the scenes they're in. Like, Falcone has more of the cool-headed intimidation that we normally associate with mob bosses, whereas Penguin is clearly more charismatic, more personable. He's a bit more in your face with what he says or does, which, given how I just described him, is probably connected to his being a joke in the crime world. Like, again, I'll get more into these two, Falcone especially, when it comes to the story section, but they're still solid characters. It's the same thing with Commissioner Gordon. I don't have as much to say about him, but I like how he works within the law, collecting clues and stuff for Batman, whereas Batman goes around and actually does the heavy lifting that the police either can't or choose not to do. Now onto Catwoman. One thing I like about her is that, like the Riddler, they give and take various traits from previous iterations of the character. They still manage to change things enough to fit within the framework of the story, while keeping the character recognizable. One example I came up with off the top of my head is how Catwoman is heavily sexualized in most Batman media, and while that wouldn't feel out of place in the sort of crime noir story that they're telling here, I like how they handled it more tastefully. Like, anytime she's running around in full costume and everything, there isn't a focus on what she's wearing, or what part of her is exposed while it's happening. Even in moments like her introduction, or when Batman has her wear these sort of camera-based contact lenses in order to see around in the Iceberg Lounge, instead the movie focuses on the scene itself and how it serves the larger narrative. Another example of this being when Batman tracks Catwoman back to her apartment. Instead of just having a long drawn-out scene of her changing, we quickly see her getting into the cat suit that she normally wears to go and rob places, and then she's in and out. And within that same scene, we are shown Catwoman's living conditions and are given a pretty good reason as to why she would want to turn to a life of crime. That being that she has a roommate who we later learn she's planning to leave Gotham with, using money from the priceless items that she's stealing. Now, like the other characters, there's definitely more I could say about her, but as you'd expect, that would definitely cut more into the story section. So let's move on to the big boy himself, Batman. Like my Sonic movie video, I'm dedicating an entire section of the characters portion to Batman specifically, because I feel there's a lot more that's done with him in comparison to previous iterations compared to the other characters. One of the immediate differences is that this is a younger take on the character. Rather than being well into his career or just starting off, this version of Batman is still figuring himself out. He's been at this for 2 years, but the way he talks and thinks, you'd think he's been at it for 20, which immediately brings me to the Affleck version. Now, just a side note, I don't dislike DCEU Batman. I find him to be more missed potential than anything else, and this video isn't simply here to tear him down. Rather, it's to compare him to this more recent iteration of the character to see what similarities and differences they have. For example, I think both Batmen have solid introductions. DCEU Batman is introduced by showing a criminal who's already been beaten up, and then Batman leaving the crime scene. Whereas 2022 Batman is introduced through the lens of a group of criminals as they're about to commit an act, only to be beaten up by Batman. Now, I think what sets these two apart is that while Snyder's version simply showcases the aftermath of the act and then shows later examples, Reeves' version showcases Batman in the act and then shows the reaction to it from an innocent bystander. If you remember, I actually used part of that act in my opening for the video, though the rest of it showcases Batman taking on the rest of the gang after they witness him beat up their leader. And like I said before, this makes Batman more of a force to be reckoned with. Not only that, but the fact that this version of Batman is only 2 years into his career and has the crowd control tactics of the Arkham games, essentially, is much more impressive in my opinion. Which brings me back to Snyder's Batman and what was arguably his most controversial aspect. Now, one of the biggest problems with Batman killing isn't just that it goes against the character, but that makes him more interchangeable as a result. Like, you could replace Batman with any other superhero and it wouldn't make much of a difference, because every superhero has a body count. So it being the scary gimmick that Batman can now kill people doesn't make it as impressive. And that's what makes Batman's no-kill policy so much more interesting to me. He's the perfect candidate to start running around and killing people without any question, but he doesn't because of his resolve. He doesn't want to kill people no matter how far he's pushed, which is what makes Reeves' Batman so much more compelling. The fact that he doesn't kill people when this is a Batman who canonically faced the Joker in his first year is so much more astounding. One other thing I like about this newer version of Batman is how he appears to be more worn down. Affleck's version is stated as having been in Gotham for 20 years, but we don't really get that feeling, whereas Pattinson's Batman has only been in Gotham for 2 years, and he looks withered. He looks like he's falling apart, just like the city he's in. But despite that, and the events of this movie, Batman still believes in the city, and continues to fight for it, no matter the cost. Now, like all the other characters, Batman has a lot more that I could say that's more relegated to story material. So, let's finally move on to that. Okay, so let's talk about the story of this film. Just a side note, as I mentioned in all my videos, this contains spoilers for the Batman. So, if you haven't watched the film yet, please go and do that first. But if you have watched the film or don't care, let's begin. In this iteration of Batman, Bruce Wayne is 2 years into his tenure as the Dark Knight, working tirelessly to clean up the streets of Gotham City, although his efforts aren't proving very successful, as not only has crime gone up, but now there is a serial killer known as the Riddler, running around murdering Gotham City's officials. So, with the help of Catwoman and Commissioner Gordon, Batman must figure out how to stop the Riddler's bloody rampage, while also exposing the corruption in Gotham City. Alright, so with that synopsis out of the way, let's take a look at the original film's plans and see how they compare. Just a friendly reminder to everyone that everything I say here will be based more on speculation rather than fact, so take what I say with a grain of salt. Okay, so the only thing about this film that was really set in stone is the fact that Slade, better known as Deathstroke, was going to be the main villain, but everything after that is a bit more muddier in terms of what we can conclude. Essentially, Slade blames Batman for the death of his son, and as a result goes around systematically destroying Batman's life piece by piece, starting with draining his assets, destroying his company, and later killing his loved ones. So basically, the film is designed to test Batman's physical and mental fortitude. Now, this is going to be a pretty hot take, but I'm really glad that they used the Riddler for the final version of the movie. It's not that I hate Deathstroke or anything, I mean, he was really good in Teen Titans, and outside of that, I've heard he's pretty alright. I don't really consume as much of the outside media, but I just don't think he would have been greatly handled in this film. But if you've seen how the villains in like Marvel movies are handled, I think you'll start to understand what I mean. For example, what is Bruce Wayne? He is a genius, and he is a very capable fighter. What is Slade? He is a genius, and he's a very capable fighter. Yes, the two have different backgrounds and everything, but Slade would basically just be a bad guy with the same abilities as Batman, and thus he wouldn't have as much individuality in comparison. Not only that, but further taking away from Slade's impact is the fact that this version of Batman has killed before, so Slade could very well be justified in his anger towards Bruce, which is why I like the Riddler so much. Instead of just being a complete match for Batman physically, mentally, and everything, he is specifically an intellectual threat. Throughout the film, he's constantly steps ahead of everyone, even Batman. And even the situations where Batman does manage to catch up, he always falls behind just a little bit because he's not experienced enough to properly handle these situations. Take the scene where Riddler straps a bomb to the district attorney's neck. An experienced Batman would have just cut the bomb off or had made a bat nanotech to sort of defuse it. But no, this version of Batman is forced to play a game with the Riddler, a Saw type game, where they try to expose the corruption in Gotham City. But Batman ultimately fails because the district attorney would rather swallow his blood than his pride. Or take later on in the film when it's revealed that Riddler planted bombs along Gotham City's seawall. He had already been apprehended at that point, and Batman had even considered hanging up the cowl. But if he hadn't gone to talk to Riddler about the rest of his plan, he would never have known. Yeah, Batman would have still come in to save the day, but he wouldn't have had as much of a clue as to what he needed to do to stop everything. Though personally, I think the best scene with the Riddler is at the beginning of the movie when he's shown murdering Gotham's mayor. Again, like I mentioned with Batman, this scene really paints the character as a force to be reckoned with, because he was able to get into the mayor's house on top of spying on him and everything, and then kill him so effectively. Which leads me into another point that I wanted to use in the characters section. I think it was a great decision to make the Riddler a serial killer. More importantly, I think it was a great decision that they play the whole angle straight. Yes, the Batman has a very dark tone, but Riddler being a serial killer could easily come off as try-hard edgy, but it doesn't. Instead, they use it once again to showcase how smart the character is. At the start of the movie, Riddler has already murdered the mayor, and Batman is catching up. And that's a constant theme you'll see. Riddler has already killed the person before Batman can figure out what it was they did, or their connection to whatever Riddler is trying to do. Not only that, but the movie doesn't dumb down Batman either. Yes, he's inexperienced, but he actually figures out everything that the Riddler is doing. My only gripe with this though is that I feel they could have made the Riddler being a serial killer more urgent, like who's he going to take out next. The problem I have with the Batman is that partway into the movie, it becomes a bit too focused on Gotham's criminal underworld, specifically Carmine Falcone. I'm not saying the stuff they did with him was bad, I just feel they could have had a better balance. Like, just before the Riddler bombs Wayne Tower, Batman learns about Thomas Wayne and the Renewal Fund, that Thomas Wayne had a reporter killed in order to cover up the issues that his wife had with mental health. Worse still, after the death of the Waynes, we learn that all the money had been funneled into the pockets of Gotham's elite, hence why Riddler has been systematically ripping them to shreds. Now, I don't love when Batman media tries to call back to the character's childhood.
Childhood? Only children have childhoods!
Okay, anyways, I think this was a good way to incorporate the Waynes into the story without having them completely overtake or having to show their death again. Instead, they show us that, like Batman, Thomas Wayne wasn't perfect, and that he would make mistakes on occasion, even if those mistakes were pretty severe compared to what Bruce is doing. But the problem here is that the movie jumps right back into the criminal underworld aspect, and as a result, we start to lose some of that more personal connection. Like, it isn't until Carmine Falcone is literally killed off that we get to properly focus on the Riddler and see the full extent of his plan, that being the bombs. And again, I feel like we could have gotten at least 1 or 2 scenes of him planting these bombs along the seawall to show us that, you know, he's still in the movie and that Riddler is still active. But other than that, I'd say The Batman is a genuinely fun and subversive movie that is worth your time, so long as you have 3 hours. Now, let's wrap up the video. So, what do you think? Why does your voice sound different in the video? Oh my god. Tell me that's not the only thing you picked up from that? Look, the other end of the portal's reopened. Buddy, you're not making a good case for yourself. Oh hey, you're right. I am. Yeah, it looks like it just opened too. Let's see if it leads back to our universe. Oh well, whatever beats being here. You have got to be joking. Thank you guys for watching. Be sure to like, share, subscribe, and tell me down in the comments section. What did you like about the Batman? What didn't you like? And which version of Batman is your favorite? Also, as a bonus question, tell me which villain down in the comments would you like to see in the sequel. Subscribe today to join the A-list, and have a great day. Bye!